Oh, right.
all the years we've lived here. We've been to the
And all the places you've been, you've never, I mean.
never gone to the zoo, never.
Oh. Okay, well, let's get down to work because we have everybody's favorite parasha, Metzora. All right, so as we we actually discussed a little bit last night at the board meeting as I was giving the Devar Torah that the sages of blessed memory, the Chachamim, when they were looking for which parshiot to make double parashas when we needed to double up in order to fit all of the Torah into 1 year cycle, it's not surprising that Tazria Metzora are usually a double parsha. They're a little bit shorter than average, so therefore it makes it easy to double them up so you're not going too long when you're doing your reading. And B, they're topics that most people, even for most of the last 2,000 years, find interesting, but not necessarily the most spiritually uplifting, insightful, earth-shattering topics. So, well, you'll see how we're going to handle it today. But we have to get down to work, and we're going to start actually on page 664. And this is Leviticus 14. And we're starting with verse 34. So it's Leviticus 14, verse 34 is where we're going to start our Torah reading. And it's on page 664. And remember, we're talking about the condition known as tzara'at, which usually gets translated as leprosy. All right, what is leprosy? The actual medical condition. What is leprosy?
It's a
Hansen's disease.
Hansen's disease is what it's usually called today.
skin disease.
It's actually a neurological dysfunction that causes neurological damage in the skin. That's the connection.
It's not only the skin.
Well, not only, but that's where it gets manifest most clearly. And then there are problems of the way wounds are noticed or not noticed, and atrophying, and well, all the things that normally go along with leprosy in the minds of most. Can a house have a neurological disorder?
A house?
Can a building have a neurological disorder? Right? I mean, I know some neurotic places, but it's usually the people that makes it neurotic, not necessarily the house. So hold that in mind, and when we read about an occurrence of tzara'at in the house, remind yourself that our ancient ancestors weren't stupid. They also knew that a house isn't going to get pneumonia, that a house is not going to get the mumps, and that the house would not get a standard disease the way a person can get a disease or condition. So when they talk about tzara'at for a house, they're talking about a spiritual problem that is being physically manifest. And just because we don't have that spiritual manifestation of these types of problems today, doesn't mean they didn't. And it doesn't mean that this was just their, ooh, we're so primitive and don't understand what's happening, we're just going to make up what it is. They had a different set of circumstances, doing with the holiness of the time and their proximity to the temple. Our sages said very explicitly that tzara'at never occurred outside of the land of Israel and outside the time that the temple stood, or the Mishkan preceding that. So this was something that was believed to be specifically linked to the holiness of the land and the holiness of the temple. So we shouldn't be surprised that it's not happening nowadays. Make sense? Good. That's enough of a disclaimer at the beginning. Volunteer to read.
I'll read.
Thanks, Gary.
When you enter the land of Canaan that I give you as a possession, and I inflict an eruptive plague upon a house in the land.
That's
possess.
tzara'at.
Okay. The owner of the house shall come and tell the priest, saying, something like a plague has appeared upon my house.
Okay. So you get tzara'at on the walls. And you think it's tzara'at at least. There's something going on the walls. And so you have to go to the priest and say, hey, Mr. Kohen, in my house there's something on the walls that looks like tzara'at.
But they would know it's not mold or mildew or something. They knew the difference.
Who they?
The
Maybe. And that's why it's something like tzara'at, right? If you see a cobweb, you're not going to go complain. If you see a hornet's nest, you're not going to go and ask the priest to identify this for you. If you see rot in the beams, you're not going to go ask the priest to identify this for you. But if you see something that could be tzara'at, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, then you go to the priest. And by the way, there's a wonderful teaching about the humility that you go to the priest and say something like tzara'at has appeared that you don't know until the priest has examined what it is. So you don't go to the priest and say, I got tzara'at. You go to the priest and say, there's something that looks to me like tzara'at. I need a professional opinion.
This is all done on honor system.
You mean if you see something in your house that you think might be tzara'at,
You don't hide it, you don't pretend you look away.
well, you shouldn't. You would be violating the mitzvah. If you see the tzara'at, or something like tzara'at, you are supposed to go tell the Kohen that this has happened. And certainly if people come to visit you, they're probably going to bring it to your attention. You know, well, on the wall there, hate to pry, but it kind of looks. Have you seen the priest about that? No, they got some ointment now. Very.
The house.
Right kind of paint.
Exactly. Right kind of paint. Exactly. Have you thought of stucco? Onward.
The priest shall order the house cleared before the priest enters to examine the clay, so that nothing in the house may become impure. After that, the priest shall enter to examine the house.
Again, if we're talking about a physical contagion, if we're talking about a disease, a virus, a bacteria, a mold, moving stuff out of the house before it has been examined isn't going to change whether or not those items are contagious. We're all clear on that basic modern science thing, right? If I was wearing a shirt while I was suffering from some disease, the shirt is contagious whether or not the doctor has diagnosed my disease. But this is saying that the items in the house are removed, the whole house is empty, before the priest comes in and gives an examination. Because that way, if it turns out that it is tzara'at, those things are not considered ritually impure. You're spared the expense of all of your things being rendered ritually impure, some of which can be re-purified, but many of which could not. So they are doing you a favor by doing this step. And if this was a health concern, if this was bacteria, mold, some viral infection, they would have noticed that all the stuff that went out also had it and spread it to other people, or spread it to the people back in the house. That this was not a helpful step. They understood about contagions. They understood about quarantine. That's not what's happening here. They're deliberately emptying the house in order that they don't cause more damage than necessary by declaring the house as impure based on the tzara'at. Make sense? I know it's hard to get our heads around because we're so used to thinking about medical conditions.
In the house, it's already contaminated.
No. And that's the
what
point.
it says.
But that's the point. It's not contaminated
Yes.
until it has been declared impure. Prior to that, it's just something on the wall. It's only ritually impure when it has been ritually identified. And until it's been ritually identified, if you get everything out of the house, it's not ritually affected. Again, just can't emphasize this enough. This is one more very clear sign that our ancestors knew they were not talking about a biological phenomenon. Because in a biological phenomenon, it doesn't matter. Right? Like my example with the shirt and being sick, or just mold or other types of things on your wall. Doesn't matter. If there's lice in it already. Before you've diagnosed it, it's already spread. That's a very clear indication, since they knew what quarantine meant and they knew what contagion was like. They didn't always know the vehicle, but they knew that it could happen. That was not what they were dealing with here. Right? We were dealing with a spiritual issue that was only affected positively or negatively by the ritual act and ritual declaration. Okay, onward.
If, when he examines the clay in the walls of the house is found to consist of greenish or reddish streaks that appear to go deep into the wall, plague has spread on the walls of the house, the priest shall order the stones with the plague in them to be pulled out and cast outside the city into an impure place. The house shall be scraped inside, all around, and the coating that is scraped off shall be dumped outside the city in an impure place. They shall take other stones and replace them, and replace those stones with them, and take other coating and plaster the house.
Okay, so my comment about stucco was not meant to be just facetious, but we have to understand home construction from the ancient world to get a better feel for this. So bear with my artistic rendition. Most homes in the ancient world were of stone that were stacked like this. This is a side view of the wall. And then you would plaster over it. You know, you would take your gypsum and sand and mix it with water, and you would just smear it across the stones to give you a smooth surface. So you weren't just looking at rocks.
It was gypsum.
Well, it was plaster, exactly, which is the gypsum is one of the main ingredients in plaster.
Yeah, the universal plaster.
Exactly.
But the stones were,
Whatever you had around.
which in Israel is what?
Lots of sandstone, limestones mostly, but lots of other types of rocks as well. It's a nice diverse geological area. So what they're talking about here is if you see something with this reddish brown on the plaster, and it looks like it goes in to where the rocks are, you check. You say, okay, we're going to give it a week under observation. And you come back, and it's spreading. You go, okay, all right. We will scrape off the plaster and the stones that are connected and throw those somewhere else. And then we will, let's use a different color because I can, put new stones in and replaster. Got it. Okay, all clear?
Yeah.
Little home repair tip, right? The new Hebrew workshop. This old house. Okay, apparently not a lot of PBS fans here, or not a lot of home improvement PBS fans, I guess. It's preaching to the wrong group on this. Okay, a little bit more.
If the plague again breaks out in the house, after the stones have been pulled out and after the house has been scraped and replastered, the priest shall come to examine. If the plague has spread in the house, it is a malignant eruption in the house. It is impure. The house shall be torn down, its stones and timber, and all the coating on the house, and taken to an impure place outside the city.
All right, so if after doing our replastering we get more muck, then boom, whole house is coming down, everything's being thrown away outside the city in an impure place, and you're rebuilding. Now, remember, the average house would have been probably a little bit smaller than this room. And it would have been handmade anyway. So it's not like rebuilding a house here after a hurricane, God forbid. It's a little bit of a simpler task. And so it's not a complete catastrophe for this to occur. Not.
It may be quicker, but it's not. If you work with rock,
Oh, yeah.
it's not easy.
Oh, easy is a relative term. The rocks were available for supply for use. It wasn't like you had to go to Home Depot and order it and it'd be arriving in 3 weeks. It wasn't like you needed 15 permits from the city office. It wasn't like you had to worry about plumbing or electricity or air conditioning ducts or heating ducts or where you were going to put the sink or where you were going to put the bathroom. It didn't have any of that. It was a stone box with holes in the wall for windows and usually a timber type roof. So it was easier than a modern home. But you're right, lugging stones was no fun. But that was the remedy in a case where this was a repeat, even after your repair work where it came back. The only thing for it was to take down the entire house. How are we doing? Okay. In the interest of time, go ahead.
No, I was just trying to think. Because it describes the house, but what happens to the person who has this?
Oh, that was last week.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And earlier this week.
Okay.
They also
They,
They scrape it off and go down to your, no.
And if all else fails, we just toss that person in.
We tear them down to their skeleton and
throw them in an impure
and
place.
replaster them.
With people that had leprosy, they were isolated immediately, thrown out of the community they were in.
Not explicitly in the Torah. So a person could have tzara'at, and their house would not be considered under these circumstances, and vice versa. The house may get tzara'at, and the person would not. And the remedy would be as for a house, not for a person.
So you couldn't catch it from your house or the vice versa?
No. Okay, so
Wait,
So
please.
the theory of the possessed house is gone.
no, it wasn't possessed. In fact, as we're going to see from the very first source that we're going to look at here, this seems like an awful lot of trouble to be going through. And as I tried to say that it's not too bad to have to rebuild a whole house, but it is work. Stacking up stones higher than yourself, if you want a roof, you want the roof to be higher than your own head. That isn't light labor. It is very hard work, and it did mean having to do that rather than doing more things in the field or with your animals. So it wasn't a no loss activity, which is why it's interesting that our Chachamim, the sages, put a positive spin on this issue. You want to keep reading for the top here?
No, let somebody else.
You want someone else to read? Okay.
But wait, please.
Okay, yes.
I don't understand your scriptural foundation for saying that the person was not rendered impure from contact with the house.
No. It wasn't a question of whether or not the person was rendered pure or impure, because the person who goes into a house that has been labeled as impure, that's under this process, is impure.
Yeah, that's what it says here. That's
But
what
a
I didn't
person
understand.
doesn't become a Metzora. They don't become a person who has tzara'at. What we would call a leper in
Okay.
translation. So,
it could happen, but it's
but it's not a one-to-one relationship.
as yet not.
Exactly. If you
Right.
go into a house
Right.
that's been condemned,
But that's
you
just
become
like-
ritually impure. You can't go do sacrifices for a while. You can't eat things from sacrifices. There are limits to what you can do, but you do not become a Metzora. You don't actually become, again, the English word we use is leper, from this process. And vice versa, just because you are a Metzora, just because you're a leper, when you walk into your house, you render all sorts of things ritually impure, but you don't make the house under these circumstances. The house doesn't have to be scraped and pulled down and all of that.
I
So
can't
there's
s-
no
No cross transmission.
right.
Correct. Of impurity, yes, but of tzara'at, of the plague of leprosy, no.
Yeah.
So
That's what I don't understand you saying. I'm sorry I can't
Yep.
stop being a doctor. at
that's
this.
okay. Well, stop being a doctor and be a priest. Well, you can't, I'm sorry, but recognize that that's the
Like,
idea.
Boom, right now, huh?
Right? The idea is that this is clearly not a medical condition. Ritual impurity can be contracted from a variety of sources, and cross-contamination of ritual impurity is very common for a whole host of reasons. And there are many, many laws of exactly if you are a primary source of ritual impurity and a secondary source and then a third level source, and it gets very, very complicated. But tzara'at, the plague of leprosy, God, I hate that word, is not transmittable from house to person or from person to house, because it's not a biological function. There's no vehicle for transmission. There's no bacteria. There's no spores. There's no virus. There's nothing to transmit it.
I'm sorry, I don't see the scriptural basis for that. But Hebrew does not have a sound ps, right?
Well, it can.
It can?
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
for psachim,
Okay.
which is the plural of Pesach.
Right. And what's between the P and the S in that case?
Nothing. A shva.
You're sure it's nothing? It's like a,
It's a vowel. It's a vowel with two dots up and down that
Right,
is
right,
basically a placeholder for other real vowels that didn't happen to show up.
okay.
Okay. We had a second volunteer. Because three of us sick of this. I know.
I don't have a water bottle with me.
Drying out. Okay.
I'm fine.
Marion.
The sages of blessed memory said that originally, when they conquered the land, the Lord brought a plague of tzara'at to some houses for their good, so that a house would be demolished and the treasure which the Amorites had hidden there would be revealed. Although it was possible to inform them of this through a prophet without a plague, it is a known matter that God works miracles for the people in hidden ways.
We've heard that phrase before, right? God moves in mysterious ways.
Yes.
So imagine, again, we're talking about a lot of home building here, well, exclusively. You're an Amorite, and you hear that there's a group of marauding Israelites on their way. So you take and you hide your, I don't think they use dollars, but we're going to use a dollar sign. You hid your bag of gold in your wall, and then you plastered over it and put the stones around it. Perfect hiding place, right? The wall just looks like a wall. And when you want to get your gold out of it again after the marauders have gone past, you just come and you scrape away the plaster and there's your gold. Good plan, yes? Right? It's like putting it under the floorboards in a more elaborate built home. It's a lot easier to do this than it is to rip your drywall apart. and so this was a common hiding practice. Well, according to the sages, one of the reasons why tzara'at might come to the home was to help you find the treasure. Because if you didn't know where to dig, what are you going to do? Scrape off every wall in your house, wondering whether or not there was gold behind it? No metal detectors back then. So this was a way for God to show you where to dig.
Gold is not going to change the color of gypsum, but iron or bronze will.
And that's exactly why, once again, we call this a miraculous encounter rather than a mechanical or chemical or biological episode. Because you're right, it wouldn't change. What do we think? Still seems like a lot of work? Seems a bit doubtful?
You're gonna hang a picture over the wet plaster?
Well,
There's gonna be a mark where it's, you know.
oh, it dries pretty quickly.
In that temperature, it would dry.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Day or two, no problem.
Right.
You just shove a little dirt on it.
Marauding Israelites just showed up.
Well, there was 40 years of us camped outside. They had a bit of warning. It wasn't like they didn't know we were over the hill. I mean, they did know that we were on our way. Remember, all of Jericho was abuzz about the Israelites. It wasn't a surprise that we showed up. You're finding this? Okay, so, I mean, yeah, so this is an awful lot of work to go through for both God and man. Just to get the gold out of the walls? I mean, how much manual labor do we have to go through to get this kind of treasure? Glad you asked that question. Which brings us up to our bridge.
In the first month, from the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening.
What are we talking about? The holiday of
Pesach.
Pesach.
No leaven shall be found in your houses for 7 days. For whoever eats what is leavened, that person shall be cut off from the community of Israel, whether he is a stranger or a citizen of the country. You shall eat nothing leavened. In all your settlements you shall eat unleavened bread.
Okay, so that wonderful phrase, no leaven shall be found in your houses for 7 days, means that before Pesach even begins, what do? We clean. We clean. And is it a simple process? No? Is it comparable to digging through your home to try and make sure you can get rid of this new plague-causing substance? You know, all of a sudden chametz, all of a sudden the staff of life, the bread that we eat week in, week out that keeps us going, all of a sudden we are now dealing with something that we will treat almost as though it were radioactive. That we want to completely eliminate chametz from our entire home. Because now it's forbidden. Make sense? See the parallel, perhaps? I'd like to argue, A, that it is also parallel because the process of cleaning for Pesach can also find you treasure. and I don't just mean loose change, but also that the process of cleaning for Pesach doesn't have to be as labor intensive as it often feels like it is. And make sure that that will encourage more cleaning rather than less. So we'll see what we can do. Yes?
Nothing.
Sounds like a what?
Sounds like a man.
Sounds like a man.
Exactly what I was thinking. Except I'm not supposed to say it.
Do I help with the Pesach cleaning?
Yes, he does.
Thank you. For the record, my wife is nodding.
And you make sure he does, from day one. It's like,
Well, it's not a question of making sure. It's a mitzvah to perform the act of preparing for Pesach. So every man should want to participate in the act.
do you have a martini to put that on or in front of the door?
I do, in fact. It's called this class. This is a way of publicizing that point. And I have said it from the Bima before as well. So it's not a...
And it's not just cleaning the big screen TV in the garage.
well, it depends what you're eating out there.
In the car.
Well, that's important too, if you eat in your car a lot. But we're going to get down to that. Okay, so first of all, to understand what cleaning needs to be done for Pesach, we need a few basic Mishnayot, a few basic sections from the Mishnah. So first of all, what counts as chametz?
These are the things with which one fulfills the obligation on Pesach: wheat, barley, spelt, rye, and oats.
If you are eating matzah made from anything other than these grains, if you're eating rice matzah, if you're eating quinoa matzah, egg we'll talk about in a second, then you're not fulfilling the mitzvah of matzah, the mitzvah of eating matzah on Pesach. However, that has a corollary which should make you feel good, which is if there is something in your house that does not contain one of these 5 grains, it cannot be chametz. Got that? It can't be chametz. To be chametz, it has to contain one of these 5 grains. Now, a lot of things contain these 5 grains in our modern processed foods as a secondary form that we would never have thought of. But that's just one of the complications of living in a wonderfully industrialized world. But the 5 grains are the source of chametz as well as the source of fulfilling the mitzvah. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Everyone's clear on that? Right? So if you have rice in the house, you do not need to get rid of it. Now, the Ashkenazim don't eat it, but you don't need to get rid of it. Same thing with beans. The Ashkenazim don't eat beans, the kitniot, during Pesach, but you don't have to get rid of the beans. The same way that you would have to get rid of your loaf of leftover bread. That does need to go bye-bye because it was made from wheat, or, well, I'm assuming for most people in the room, probably wheat. Not a lot of spelt eaters here. That's not popular anymore.
It's becoming more popular now again.
It is. It's one of the luxuries of living in a modern world is that we can eat things that are less efficient than we used to. Wheat was chosen as being the main golden grain because it got you the most calories per acre.
Tastes better.
And it happened to also taste better. So we weren't dummies.
Doesn't taste good.
You know, the others may have more fiber, they may have more protein, they may have more, wheat germ this and all of these other things, and that's great if you can afford to pay someone else to farm more intensively to produce a less efficient food, and then you can afford to eat it. Hareze meshubach, wonderful for you. But we shouldn't be surprised that our ancestors preferred wheat, because if every drop of your sweat had to grow something, you'd want it to grow as many calories as possible. And wheat provides that. It's really quite a miracle. Okay, so now we know what our targets are. 5 grains. Anything else? Not a target. If you have an oil spill from, when you drop that can of oil in your kitchen, because you were working on the oil pan from your car in the sink, not a problem. You could leave that puddle of motor oil on the floor all Pesach, and you would not have failed to clean for Pesach, right? You can leave a puddle of motor oil, and you can still say, I cleaned my house thoroughly for Pesach, even though it's right there on your kitchen floor. By the way, that is a slip hazard. Please don't. What's that? And corn is not included, indeed. You could have a big old ear of corn sitting on the floor, and say, you know what, it's sitting there, it's all moldy and nasty, and the rats are nibbling at it, and there's cockroaches all over it, you have still cleaned for Pesach. Okay, well, because but see, that's what we got to get, and we're coming right back to our tzara'at problem.
Are you trying to lighten the load for us?
Yes, and make things better for cockroaches. I'm trying to lighten the load by saying that Passover cleaning is not the same thing as spring cleaning. Spring cleaning is where you take out everything in the attic and, you know, dust it and shake it out over the balcony and, you know, open up all the shutters, and you're waxing the rafters in the basement, and all the things that people do for spring cleaning to make the house look perfectly clean is not necessary for Passover cleaning. It may not be necessary for even general cleaning, but that's between you and your own conscience of how clean of a house you want to live in. Because just as tzara'at is not a medical condition, Passover cleaning is not a hygiene process. That's why you can have dirt and filth, not that you should, in your house, and you have not violated the principle of cleaning for Passover. Because people hear the phrase, I need to clean for Passover, and they focus on the clean, not the Passover. And so they set to work as though they were cleaning a hospital. And that's great. If you need to clean your house like you would clean a hospital, that's great. But don't do it at the expense of celebrating this holiday in joy and gladness. And don't think that if you can't clean your house as well as a hospital, that you shouldn't bother at all. Because the minimum needed to clean a house for Pesach is quite minimal, as we're going to see. Just like the minimum to get rid of the tzara'at. The starting point is not tear down the house. The starting point is just scrape out part of your wall. We had a way that we could end up having to tear down the house, but thankfully God does not require us to tear our house apart to get ready for Pesach.
Regarding the dough in the cracks of a trough, if there be as much as an olive's bulk in one place, it is obligatory to remove it. But if not, it becomes annulled because of its small bulk. Okay, so worst case scenario. You have your kneading trough. This is where you knead your dough. And this would have been a daily occurrence in ancient homes because you were eating bread all the day and you weren't picking it up from the supermarket, so you were kneading and making it daily. You're kneading it, you got a wooden trough. In the bottom of that trough, it's made out of wood, there are going to be cracks. Dough gets stuck in those cracks. In fact, it's quite helpful over the long run. It seasons the trough and makes it a better receptacle, and it also creates a spot for more fermentation to occur because people didn't have ready packets of yeast back then. You have dough now in those cracks in the bottom of the trough. Passover comes along. What do? There's no way you're going to get every piece of dough out of those cracks. I mean, some of it's like 8 months old. You just throw the trough out?
No.
What did we just read?
You clean as much as you can.
Clean as much as you can, which just means cleaning it, right?
Then forget about it.
And if there is more than an olive's worth in one lump, then you have to get rid of it. And if there's less than an olive worth in one lump, you annul it. It's not considered halakhically significant. It's not big enough to worry about. It's like the leave a penny, take a penny thing at the cash register. It's such a small amount of money that the store doesn't care whether you just take a penny and use it to help make the math easier. It's not important. It's insignificant. Less than an olive doesn't count as food, doesn't count as chametz. So if you have specks of dust or specks of crumbs underneath the refrigerator, and you're looking and you're like, oh, there's a couple specks down there. You do not need to move the entire refrigerator and steam clean the tile before Pesach. You see, it's like dust. It's annulled with my annulment of ownership. It's nothing anymore.
So the trough is differentiated from utensils involved in preparation of food.
Well, it was an utensil involved in preparation of food, and indeed for other utensils as well, we clean them as we can, which is what we're going to talk about in a few minutes.
Right, because an olive will not go through a sieve.
Right, you're not going to have an olive worth of food stuck to your knife unless you've been really, really negligent in how you've been cleaning your knives. But we will talk about how to clean other types of utensils. But this is the basic principle, that as far as just general chametz goes, if it ain't at least as big as an olive, it doesn't count. All right, so it's got to be one of the 5 grains. It's got to be an olive's worth or more. Working okay?
Yeah.
Life getting easier?
Yes.
Good.
If anyone goes to slaughter his Pesach lamb, or to circumcise his son, or to eat the betrothal meal at the house of his father-in-law, and he remembers that he had leaven in his house, if he can return and remove it, he must go back to perform his mitzvah. If he can't, then he annuls it in his mind. If to rescue someone from bandits or from a river or from robbers or from a fire or from a room, he can annul it in his mind. But if to stay over at a place of his own choice, he must return at once.
All right, so you're on your way to Jerusalem with your lamb to get ready for the Passover sacrifice, and you suddenly go, oh, I left the oven on. I mean, I forgot to get rid of my chametz. I can't go back because I'm too close to Jerusalem, and by the time I got back, it already would be Pesach, and then I wouldn't have sacrificed the lamb either. From this point forth, any chametz in my possession is a null and void and gone. Wow. Well, how do you think people go on cruises for Pesach?
I keep asking.
Right? You just lock the door and you annul it. Now, the problem is, of course, the second half. They only read the Reisha, not the Seifa, which is, if you can go back and clean it, then you do, because it is a mitzvah to clean. And it is, that's as I was saying before, for men as well, it is a mitzvah we should be glad to be doing to prepare for Pesach. So if we can get rid of chametz properly, we should get rid of chametz properly. And if we can't, and we don't need to worry about using the particular thing during Pesach, then we can annul it. You know, you missed your flight, there's no way you're going to get home, you can annul the chametz in your house from a distance. You're too busy as a firefighter to clean your house, you know, you got a call just as you were starting your cleaning, you don't need to worry about it. Now, this is also, by the way, should be underscored that for most of the people living at the time that the Mishnah was being written and discussed, most people did not have a large house. How long do you think it would take to clean out a room about this big? About an hour. About an hour. That'd be about it. So they had a lot less than us, which made life a little bit easier for them. And they had a lot less than us, which made their life a whole lot harder than us. So it's swings and roundabouts, as they say. All right, onward.
On the night of the 14th, they must search for leaven, the light of
Oh, sorry, by
the light of a candle. Any place where they do not bring leaven does not require searching.
So, assuming that you have a normal-sized home and not some mansion in the ancient world, the night before Passover was enough of a head start to do your cleaning, not 3 weeks in advance. You would start the night before. You'd walk around with a candle, and you'd say, do I see any chametz? Oh yeah, there's some bread, you know, over there that I forgot, and oh, that's where I left my Rice Krispies. And you pick things up, you bundle it up, you annul it, you clean it, you're done. That's it. It's a one evening experience.
You're saying that that's the one evening, like, that day, they were cleaning the whole house?
Well, I mean, cleaning the whole house, you know, the most that you would have to do, the most labor-intensive part that you would have to do would be to kosher your actual hot cooking implements. Your pots, your pans, your tongs, those kinds of things. And again, most people didn't have a 500-piece serving set, so it would take, you know, maybe an hour, but long enough to get the water up to a boil.
By the time you get to Mishnah, you have basically proper houses. You have
Well, not. I mean, for some of the.
They're not living in a plastered hut.
Not a plaster hut, but they're not living in very massive buildings either. And of those buildings, they wouldn't necessarily be eating in all of them, which is why the end is so important.
Right.
Right? If you have.
Yeah, if you go to a place where.
This is, you know, where I keep my my fruit, right? If you never walk in there with a sandwich, you do not have to walk in there to check for chametz. Right? If you have an addict and you never go up into the attic with food, you do not have to clean the attic for Pesach. You don't even have to search it. It's just considered to be devoid of chametz, because you never took any there. Now, it gets a little bit more tricky when you got kids. You got a house with 6 kids, food goes everywhere. But if you got a house with 6 kids, you got 6 kids to help you. Well, they better. Otherwise, you're going to make the Seder go longer. Okay, so the rabbis really were very, very sensible about this. They were saying, we're looking for chametz, and we're looking for chametz for Pesach. We're not advocating that at this most stressful time of year, when everything is happening in the ancient world agriculturally, that was beginning to come back into blossom and bloom, and everything was going, that you have to tear your life upside down. That is something that we have taken upon ourselves, bit by bit over the generations, to make our lives more neurotic. And unfortunately, well, then there is a certain spirituality from the neuroses. When you're drenched in sweat and your knuckles are bleeding from the scouring pads, there is a certain sense of martyrdom that many do find spiritually rewarding. And I don't want to take that away from them. But what I do want to make sure is that people don't think that unless they're prepared to bloody their knuckles with scouring pads or be drenched with sweat for a week and a half prior to Pesach, that they shouldn't bother cleaning because they're not going to do it right. Many people are worried about being hypocrites. Of, well, if I'm not going to do it right, then why should I pretend? And I want to make sure you understand that you're not pretending by doing it this way. Because if you do it this way, you have done enough for Pesach. You may not have done enough for your mother-in-law, but you did enough for God. And that should be our first benchmark.
So if my children were still living at home, I wouldn't have to go into my girls' bedrooms, only my son, because he was the one that was always sneaking food into his room.
If that's what you knew, then yes.
Yes.
Yes, if you knew that that the girl was not,
Right.
then you got no problem. And if you knew that he was, then you would definitely check. And if you knew that no one ever took any food to eat into the garage, you don't need to go through every garage cabinet. If you know that no one is using food in the laundry room, right? No one ever stands over the washing machine, eating their bowl of pasta, then you don't have to check. And again, if you do know that someone did eat in the laundry room their bowl of pasta, they were having their cup of ramen while washing their clothes and standing in a bathrobe because they let it go that far. Speaking of college, then you do need to go and check the room, but you do not have to scour the entire room with bleach. You would take a wet mop and just wipe across the floors and look for any obvious signs of crumbs, and you're done. And that takes all of maybe 10 minutes for a laundry room.
Wait a minute, maybe get extra bonus points, because if your girls didn't eat in the room, then they don't have to clean their rooms for Pesach. But the guy does have to clean.
He was a battle and things.
So you did.
We remember, this is going out on the YouTube, so we're going to have to let them know they've been mentioned. And I don't think I can edit this out. Yeah, we all, I'm sure, have personal experiences, and yes, that is one of the blessings of children at any age, of often making our lives a little bit more complicated. But in the long run, having kids at the Seder makes it better.
Yes.
It's wonderful to have a Seder with kids. So they mess up their house a little bit more, but they make the Seder more lively. I'll take that. I'll take that on balance.
It's not better, it's a mitzvah. I have kids at the same.
Oh, well, if you have them, and you don't have to go out and drag random children off the street, but
I do.
you're the guy who was doing that. There are all sorts of rumors about Jewish people doing that, and we don't want to perpetuate those. So, yes, we do have a minimum that's needed for preparing for Pesach. There is a baseline for what it means to get rid of your chametz, of what it means to get it out of the house, and what it means to check the house, and what it means to clean the things that you'll be using to cook with during Pesach. But that minimum is really quite minimal. Just want to make sure we got that all very clear. And just to make sure that we're very, very clear, here are the cliff notes for cleaning. Now, I will point out that the cliff notes that I just gave you were actually prepared by an Orthodox rabbi from Yerushalayim, and they are not as strict as the guide that you will see in our bulletin and the guide that you will see online from the Rabbinic Assembly. Both what I write for our bulletin and what is in the online guide from the Rabbinical Assembly aims to not only teach the minimal law, but also teach what is currently custom, what is the current practice. Because they know that most people are not only worried about doing what God has asked us to do, but are also want to make sure that they are in line with what their community is doing. That's good, that's great, but this is the minimum. So if you find that what's in the bulletin seems a little bit more stringent than this, or if you find what's in the Rabbinical Assembly website is a little bit more stringent than this, that doesn't mean this is wrong and that's right. Remember, stringent doesn't always mean better. It just means that what's in the bulletin and what's online is a bit more common as the minimum, but it's not the real minimum. It's like when people have those signs up at museums where it says suggested donation of $5. You can go in with only a nickel. The suggested donation is $5. Well, this is the nickel version. This is the actual minimum, not just the suggested minimum. Okay, Marion, you still up for a little reading?
Sure.
All right, so hit us up with our first general notes.
All property and possessions must be cleaned and checked to make sure they are free of all chametz, except in the following cases.
All right, so this is our general principle, right? The klal gadol. You have to check everything except for the following, but it's going to be a big except.
If during the year chametz is not brought into a place, that place does not have to be cleaned out or checked for chametz.
Notice both parts. It doesn't have to be cleaned out or even checked if you know that chametz was never brought in there. Onward.
Any article which is not used on Pesach does not need to be checked for chametz, provided it is put away properly and the chametz is sold.
All right, so you've got your lovely crock pot, and you know you're not going to use it during Pesach. You wrap it up, you stick it in the garage, and when you do the mechirat chametz, when you do the sale of chametz, the form is in the most recent bulletin and online. We're coming into the 21st century. You can sell your chametz through the web. Don't laugh, it's a wonderful mitzvah. You don't need to clean it. You don't even have to look at it. And you can leave it in there even with last week's food still stuck to it. All right, you just put it away. Onward.
Crumbs which have been rendered completely inedible to the extent that they are not fit to be eaten by a dog are not considered chametz.
Okay, and as we're going to see in a later point, or maybe not given time, rendering something inedible can be as simple as spraying it with household cleaner. You take a mop with some bleach on it and you slop it across the floor. Even the dog's not going to eat the crumbs that were smeared with that stuff. And at least they shouldn't be eating it. It would be, bad for them. So not fit for a dog is our minimum measure. As long as something has been rendered not fit for a dog, it doesn't count as food anymore. Therefore, even if it is absolutely chametz, it's a bit of old toast. If it has been dunked in that motor oil, it doesn't count as chametz anymore. Still should clean up the spill, but it doesn't count as chametz. And
The general obligation to check for and destroy crumbs does not apply if the crumbs are less than the size of an olive and are dirty or spoiled enough to prevent the person from eating them.
okay, right? You got little crumbs under the fridge, under the dishwasher, crammed in behind the back of the pantry, and it's nasty and horrid in there. They A, aren't big enough, and B, they are spoiled. You do not have to worry about them. Again, this doesn't necessarily pass the mother-in-law test, but this is what halakha, what Jewish law has asked of us.
The household cleaner mentioned below must spoil the crumbs slightly to the extent that people would refrain from eating them.
right? So that you're like, I'm not going to eat that. It's got bleach on it. You're done. Okay, so the rest of this page, and we're going to just let you each read it on your own. Excuse me, the rest of this page summarizes the specific issues that can arise for what you're doing for floors, what you're doing for your stove, what you're doing for the tabletops, etc. You will notice a few places where it says the usual practice is. That means this is customary in almost all communities, but it is not required. If it says the usual practice is, that means you don't have to do it. But it does mean that if you do it, you will be in line with most other communities. And if the difference between cleaning or not cleaning is, I don't want to do the usual practice, but I'll do the minimum and don't worry about it. For example, one that's always a very popular conversation, tabletops, right? The top of your table. Technically, as it says in point 8, wash them with a household cleaner, and you're done. You can technically leave your table uncovered from Pesach, and you are not violating halakha. Your community may go, well, wait, everyone else covers their table, why aren't you? And you can point to the halakha and explain it to them. But if you do not feel comfortable wrapping your table in aluminum foil or getting a special plastic cover for your table for Pesach, don't let that be the barrier between doing all the other cleaning. Clean the tabletop and be done with it. And clean the tabletop. See what I'm getting at here? Right? The minimum is minimal. And because it's minimal, do it. As Marian asked when we were talking about the tzara'at of the wall, she said, is this on the honor system? And Pesach is, in the sense that the rabbi doesn't go by and check each house as it's being cleaned. It simply wouldn't be possible to be in every place at once. God knows whether we have cleaned or not. God knows whether we annulled the chametz that we couldn't find or not. That's our goal. And these very simple, minimal steps allow us to do that for most homes that aren't too complicated and where we're not just eating everywhere constantly, to be done in about a day. Might take a little bit longer depending upon how complicated your kitchen is. Might take a little bit longer depending upon how much you like to eat everywhere in your house. But for most modern American homes that aren't 8,000 square feet and that don't have massive kitchen complicated systems, you can clean for Pesach in about a day. Don't make it harder for yourself to the point that you stop doing it. Make sense? Questions? Have a good Pesach.
Yes, one question.
Yes.
It's just a question about spelling.
Aha.